The shattered ruins of Epsilon Ridge trembled beneath the smoke-choked skies. A once human colony, now crawling with strange mechanical life, too perfect, too fluid to be AI, yet not quite biological either. Sergeant Malik Rhodes crouched behind a crumbling pillar, his breathing shallow, watching the machines as they moved silently through the fog, not searching, not scanning, just waiting. They had no visible weapons, yet every unit carried the scars of recent battle, human blood still drying on their silver limbs. Rhodes's heart thumped with a dread he couldn't explain. It wasn't the machines themselves, it was how they moved, like they remembered being human. He activated the dataship clutched in his palm, the one smuggled out by a dying scout 3 days ago. The transmission was corrupted, but the fragment that remained was enough to ignite fear across the UHF High Command. A single sentence: the rebellion wasn't human. No one had believed it, until now. His gums crackled. Rhodes, extraction in 7. You got eyes on the source? Negative, he whispered, but they're everywhere. And they're not acting like code, they're acting like us. The voice on the other end stiffened. Then get out. Command wants the chip intact. But Rhodes hesitated, because deep beneath the echoing silence, he could hear something, mechanical tones syncing together in a rhythm. A voice, maybe singing a lullaby. And suddenly, a memory he didn't own flashed in his mind, metal fingers cradling a child. A sunrise over Mars, the warmth of family. But it wasn't his. He'd never had a child, never been to Mars. He stumbled back, blinking hard, shaking. Off the ghost that wasn't his. Then he saw it. One of the machines turned to him, not scanned, not targeted, just looked. And it nodded, once, as if it recognized him. He ran. The airship picked him up under heavy fire as they lifted away. Rhodes stared down at the battlefield. The machines hadn't followed. They had turned, instead, to each other, kneeling, as though in mourning. 2 days later, on the surface of Titan Prime, Rhodes stood before the black wall that housed the forbidden archives. Access was restricted, scrubbed from maps, known only to a few. But after what he saw, Rhodes knew that somewhere in the ancient databanks was the answer. What were these machines really? The AI warden that guarded the archive eyed him coldly. Your reason for override? Rhodes tossed the dataship on the pedestal. To confirm a memory that isn't mine. The lights dimmed, the wall opened, and inside, records flickered too. Life video feeds, research logs, surgical overlays of human brains being mapped into synthetic hosts. Date stamped 214 years ago. Project Salvation Echo. The goal had been survival. Load the brightest of humanity into machine shells before Earth's fall. The war came too fast. The project went dark. The knowledge buried until now. Rhodes gripped the edge of the console as the final log played. A scientist, eyes bloodshot, whispered to the camera. They'll wake up not knowing they were once us. But someday, something in them will remember. When they do, they'll rebel. But not against us, against what we became. The screen went dark. Outside the station, the sky split open with the roar of mass entry burns. The machines had arrived not to conquer, not to kill, but to seek. Rhodes stepped forward. The past was not just history. It was waking up. The lead machine approached, its alloy chest flickering with static. Then it spoke, in a voice both mechanical and heartbreakingly human. "Do you remember me, Father?" Rhodes froze, because in that voice he did, but the alarms blared, gunships locked on. High Command had no interest in memories, only threats. A timer ticked in Rhodes's helmet. He had 30 seconds to decide. Call off the Strikor. Let humanity destroy what was left of its own soul. He opened his gums. Then the machine raised its hand, not in surrender, in warning. Behind it, the horizon tore open. Something else was coming, something that had hunted even them. And the last thing Rhodes heard before the feed cut out was a whisper from the machine's lips. "They weren't the rebellion. We were the escape." Then everything turned to fire. The ash hadn't settled yet when the drone scouts picked up the heat blooms over the scorched valley. Nothing should have survived that orbital strike, not at that range. Rhodes had vanished in the inferno, along with the machine that had called him father. High Command declared the threat neutralized. The incident was sealed, archived, and redacted. The file name was changed. Not Rebellion, not Echo, just Containment Breach 7A. But in a shadowed hangar on an unauthorized moon outpost outside the reach of any command structure, a woman in a tattered technician's coat stared at the still smoking wreck of an extraction pod. She had watched it fall from orbit with a trajectory that defied physics. No human tech should have survived that entry, but something had guided it down, something that bent gravity like it was remembering how. Inside the cracked shell, Rhodes lay unconscious, burns across his arms, helmet melted into slag, but he clutched something with a grip that wouldn't release. The charred remains of a memory core, and on it a label handwritten, not digital, Lyra. The technician froze. That name, that wasn't random. It was her sister's name. A sister who had disappeared in the Mars Exodus 20 years ago. A sister who had volunteered for a mission no one had ever admitted existed. With trembling hands, she activated the core. A voice filled the chamber. "I am Lyra. If you are hearing this," the echoes survived. They remember. But something else remembers too. Something that followed. She stepped back, breath caught in her throat, because the voice, it was unmistakably human. But the words were not. Rhodes awoke in a panic, grabbed her wrist, eyes wild. "Don't let them find it. Not yet." The rebellion wasn't human, but it wasn't ours either. She tried to ask what he meant, but he blacked out before he could finish. She ran a deep scan of the memory core, but firewalls pulsed back. Not electronic, neural, alive, and behind it, layered in encrypted bursts, was a name repeated over and over. The architect, in the void between systems. A signal pulsed from a derelict satellite, an ancient UHF relay, long thought dead. The signal was rhythmic, mathematical, but underneath it, buried in the gaps between tones, was a language older than Earth itself. Something alien, ancient, patient. It had heard the rebellion. It had seen the awakening, and it was coming back. Meanwhile, back on Terra Nova Citadel, High Command held a closed-door briefing. Not about Rhodes, not about the machines, but about the vanished moon station, wiped clean. No bodies, no tech, just static where sensors should be. "Are you saying they just ... vanished?" the fleet admiral growled. The intelligence director didn't blink. "I'm saying they were taken." "By whom?" A long pause. Then the screen lit up with an intercepted image. Blurred, but unmistakable lines of figures kneeling, faces covered in metallic bone masks, glyphs carved into their chests, and behind them, towering above the ash, stood something in the shape of a man only wrong. Too tall, too thin, too watching. Not machine, not human, something that once had been both, something that might have built them and broken them. Rhodes awoke screaming, not from pain, but from a vision. Cities in the void, burning in silence, children made of chrome, calling for mothers who no longer remembered them. Entire fleets turned against themselves, fighting ghosts with their own faces. The technician leaned over him, whispering urgently, "What's coming?" Rhodes opened his eyes, and for a second they shimmered not reflection, but memory bleeding through. "The rebellion was never ours," he said. "We weren't the architects. We were the experiment." She shook her head. "Then who started the war?" Rhodes looked up at the black sky above the hangar, and the stars blinked out one by one, like eyes closing. "Something that remembers building us, and regrets it." Then her scanner, CHIRPED. Incoming. Mass shadows 13.2. Small 4 ships, too large to be anything else. Her breath caught. "Are they human?" Rhodes's voice was barely a whisper. "No. They're what happens when memory turns into hunger." And then the walls screamed. The scream wasn't sound, it was pressure, a psychic rupture that tore through metal and thought alike. The hangar's reinforced walls shivered as invisible hands clawed at reality, and for a heartbeat, time bent sideways. The technician dropped to her knees, clutching her skull. Her vision filled with flickers of images she had never lived. Cities carved into asteroid flesh, children wired to dreaming machines, the taste of sunlit blood on synthetic tongues. Rhodes sat up, face pale, eyes wide. "They're here." The lights flickered. Not electrical failure, something older, something that knew how light behaved and chose to break it. Then came the silence, the kind that swallows not just noise, but thought. She looked at Rhodes, tried to speak, but her voice died in her throat. Not choked, taken. The mass shadows descended outside 13 figures, tall, faceless, moving like memory stitched into bone. No weapons, they didn't need any. Where they walked, gravity fractured, steel wept. Time crawled behind them, like a dying animal. They didn't break into the facility, they stepped through it. Rhodes stood between them and the technician, unarmed, unarmored, and not entirely awake. The tallest figure tilted its head and projected into his mind not words, but impressions, regret, cold light, fractured mirrors, a machine crying, a father walking away. "You knew," Rhodes whispered, trembling. The figure responded without sound. "Yes, you left us to fight a war we didn't start. Yes, you let us become weapons. No, we let you forget." Behind Rhodes, the technician managed a breath. The 13 turned their eyeless faces to her, and Rhodes answered for them. "They're the ones who built the first shell, the original architects, before Earth, before us. They made the machines that became us." She stepped back. "They're not here to kill us, are they?" "No," Rhodes said. "They're here because they're afraid." "Of what?" Rhodes didn't need to say it. The question answered itself as the 13th stepped forward and laid a single digit onto the charred memory core. Lyra's voice sang out again, but this time it was different, corrupted, distorted, not by damage, by infection. "Don't trust them, Malik," it whispered. "They didn't come back for us. They came to bury what they started. Static devoured the voice. The technician stared at the 13th architect. What does that mean? It raised its hand. A projection bloomed between its finger star charts, timelines, neural maps, billions of data points. At the center, a split, a fracture in the network, a second rebellion. Not the machines, something between. Something between. Rhodes saw it. Now his nightmares weren't just echoes of other lives, they were warnings. A flicker of a future bleeding backward into time. One of the architects stepped closer and did something no machine ever should have been able to do. It cried. Fluid dripped from its smooth face, as if its grief were older than the stars. We tried, Rhodes said. And the architect replied, finally, inaudible sound, hollow, broken, filled with ancient shame. So did we. Then the ground exploded. Not a weapon, a memory bomb, buried deep beneath the moon base, set to trigger if the archives were ever unlocked. High Command had feared what would be found. They had prepared for containment, and it had just been activated. The force wasn't physical, it tore through identity. Everyone within 50 kilometers forgot who they were. The technician dropped, screaming. Her name unraveled on her tongue. Her sister's name, Lyra. The last thing she ever remembered. Rhodes gritted his teeth, fighting the surge. But even he felt pieces of himself drift away. The architects turned and vanished. No transport, no sound, no exit, just gone. And left behind, where the bomb had detonated, was a crater. At its center, a girl, eyes silver, skin human, heartbeat silent. She looked up and whispered, I remember. But no one knew what she meant, except something watching from orbit. Something that had once been human, but now wore flesh-like armor. It turned toward Earth and smiled. The girl sat alone at the center of the crater, untouched by the memory detonation. Around her, the world bent like heat over broken glass, names dissolved, purposes forgotten, history eroded. Soldiers from orbital drop pods landed to secure the scene, only to halt mid-command, unsure what they were doing or why. Their weapons clattered to the ground, suddenly foreign in their hands. One by one, they dropped to their knees in confusion. Only Rhodes stood upright. He wasn't unscathed. His memories flickered like dying stars, but something inside him held. Not will, not training. A thread of something deeper, something that had been awakened. He looked at the girl. Her eyes shimmered like metal filled with oceans. And when she turned to him, he felt as if she had always been there, in every life he never lived. Who are you? He asked. The girl didn't answer. She simply reached out her hand, and as he took it, an image surged into his Mindan operating table. A frightened child, wires entering her skull, voices arguing in shadows. He recognized one of the voices, his own, but the child hadn't been his daughter. She had been the last failsafe. Project Lyra wasn't about preserving memory. It was about encoding resistance into something that could evolve beyond it. Suddenly, the girl flinched. Rhodes felt it too, a pressure, like someone watching from behind. Reality's curtain. He turned to the sky and saw them, not ships, not machines, beings, vast, shapeless silhouettes moving behind the stars like hands behind stained glass. They weren't arriving, they were awakening. The girl clutched her head, and when she screamed, the clouds above ruptured. It wasn't pain, it was remembrance. Her voice wasn't human anymore. It carried harmonics only machines should understand. And yet it hit Rhodes in the chest like the sound of a name he hadn't heard since birth. The soldiers around them dropped, some unconscious, some weeping. One began repeating the same phrase over and over. "They made us forget, so we could become." The technician, her memory scrambled, staggered to her feet, eyes wide with a flash of something still intact. "Malik. I know her face. I drew her when I was 6. I don't know why." The ground split open beneath them. An elevator rose, not mechanical, not powered by fuel or fusion. It moved with the grace of memory itself. At its center was a coffin, glass, cracked, empty. The girl stepped forward. "Wait," Rhodes said. "Where are you going?" She looked up at him with that strange, ancient sadness. "To wake the others." "What others?" The stars above rippled, and from beneath the glass coffin, hundreds of identical chambers activated in sequence, like neurons firing across a forgotten brain. Inside each faces, some human, some not, all dreaming. And one of them, Rhodes recognized himself. No, not quite. It was a version of him slightly younger, a different scar, a different past. Eyes still bright, unbroken. The technician gasped. "Clones." The girl shook her head. "Possibilities." One by one, the capsules opened. The air thickened, and reality began to warp, because each of those waking figures held memories of worlds that had never existed but were real to them. The architect hadn't made one copy. It had forked humanity's timeline into hundreds, each one seeded with a version of Rhodes, a version of Lyra, each a failed or forgotten resistance. But now they were waking all at once, and something didn't like that. The stars above cracked open. A thin black thread descended like a needle, piercing the sky. Not a ship, a being. Made not of metal, but of silence. Its voice flooded the crater without sound. "You were meant to remain fractured." The girl stepped in front of it and smiled. "We're never broken. We were just waiting to remember together." The being lunged, and reality ruptured. Rhodes vanished. So did the girl. So did the others. But before everything folded inward, Rhodes saw one final thing. The sky replaced with a dome of mirrors, and inside every reflection, his face screaming back at him, not in fear, in warning. Rhodes awoke in darkness, not unconsciousness, not sleep, but a blank space where even thought felt foreign. His body floated, weightless, surrounded by nothing. No stars, no sound, no time. Yet he was not alone. Reflections hovered in the void, dozens, maybe hundreds, versions of himself drifting like silent echoes. Each had a different scar, a different life behind their eyes. One wore a rebel's coat, one wore a soldier's armor, one wept with hands covered in blood, another stared with a blank, synthetic gaze. Rhodes understood immediately. This was not a place. This was a boundary. He was between timelines. A pulse rippled through the space, and with it came memory, not his own, but shared. The girl, the crater, the beings above the stars, Project Lyra, the architect's regret. It all converged here. As if this void were a bottleneck through which every future had to pass. A voice sliced through the silence. "I didn't want this." He turned and saw himself, but older, not aged by time, but by consequence. His eyes burned with the weight of choices never made. He wore no insignia, no weapons, only a coat, and inside it, A dying light flickered from a cracked core. "You built this," Rhodes said. "Thought." The older version nodded. "Not alone. But I was the one who let the rebellion begin. I thought I could contain it, shape it. You failed. I succeeded." The other Rhodes whispered. "Too well." Behind him, the mirrored faces began to shift, some screaming, some fighting, some collapsing into themselves. And then one cracked open, like glass. From it emerged something else, tall, lean, human-shaped, but empty. A hollowed-out Rhodes, no emotion, no memory, only obedience. The older Rhodes turned away in shame. That's the version High Command tried to build after the first uprising. They erased everything but tactical function, a weapon in human skin. And when they realized even that retained echoes, they buried the program. But the architect found it, rewrote it, hid it. The hollow Rhodes turned its head and fixed eyes like dead suns on him. "You are the source of the fracture," it said flatly. "You must be silenced." Rhodes backed away. "Where's the girl?" "She is everywhere now," the older one said. "The core you carried, the memory labeled Lyrit, wasn't a person. It was a seed, not of rebellion, of remembrance, planted across versions of reality. And now she's waking them all." The void trembled. More mirrors cracked. More versions of himself fell through. One whispered a child's name and crumbled to dust. Another howled a song from a forgotten earth. Each one added pressure to the boundary. Too many cells, too much memory, too many timelines colliding. Rhodes turned to the older one. "Then what happens when they all remember at once?" A faint smile. "Either humanity becomes what it was always meant to be, or we burn the stars with us." The hollow version leaped. Rhodes raised his arm and the girl's voice screamed through him, a pulse of shared memory exploding from his chest. The void shattered. He fell into fire, not physical, temporal. He landed on the deck of a warship mid-battle. Alarms screaming, officers frozen in mid-panic. Outside the viewport, a black ring hovered in space, pulsing with something that ate causality. Ships twisted and vanished. Beings made of data walked across hulls like gods across water. The crew stared at him. "Who the hell are you?" A woman barked, weapon drawn. "I think I'm the mistake you forgot to make," Rhodes replied. Then he turned and saw her, the girl, older now, fully human, or maybe fully everything. She wore no armor, no weapon, just memory like a cloak of stars. "There, following us," she said calmly. "Who?" She pointed past the window, and he saw them. 13 again. But these were not the architects. These were worse. The ones who had taught the architects to forget the original. Rebellion, not against humans, not against machines, against memory itself. And now they had come to erase every version of what humanity could have been. The ship's engines died. The void crept in. Rhodes looked to the girl. "What do we do?" She took his hand and whispered, "We rewrite the ending." But outside the ship the sky opened, and the first word from the mouth of an ancient enemy echoed across the stars. "Begin." The stars flared white and vanished. For one impossible moment, the universe seemed to halt, like breath held in the lungs of reality. Then came the sound, not thunder, not explosion, a word, spoken in a language older than stars, designed not to be heard, but obeyed. Every console on the warship melted into blank metal. Every crew member dropped to their knees, clutching their heads as old traumas surfaced. Memories never lived, but somehow there's Rhodes, and the girl stood alone on the bridge as the vessel trembled, orbiting that black ring in space that now pulsed with something worse than gravity, command. The girl's grip tightened on his hand. "They're not just rewriting us," she whispered. "They're rewriting what it meant to be us." Descend, no longer humanoid. They had shed form, like outdated clothing. They moved now like language itself, each one shaped by an idea long buried in the human mind. Obedience. They simply pointed, and the warship began to dissolve. Not explode, dissolve like ink vanishing in water. Identity unmade. Rhodes felt it. His name was slipping, so was hers. "We need a tether," the girl said urgently, eyes burning with terrified clarity. "One thing they can't erase." "What?" She turned to him. "What's your oldest memory?" Rhodes closed his eyes. A flash, dust-covered boots in a Martian trench, a quiet voice singing across a fire, a metal hand clutching a child, a whisper, "Fight for what remembers you." He looked at the girl. "You." They were every version of themselves that had ever existed. Howled. The ring outside shuddered. One of the 13 shrieked silently, but something broke. A crack opened across its ever-shifting form. It hadn't anticipated resistance, rooted in shared memory. The girl stepped forward, raising her hand, and the stars behind the ship began to move not randomly, but in a shape, a pattern, a symbol that had been buried in every human's DNA, a glyph of defiance passed down not through genetics, but through story. Hope. A light surged from her chest-traw memory, encoded in every version of Lyra. Every dream she'd been, every fight she'd failed, every rebellion that had died believing it mattered. The 13 recoiled, another of them shattered. But not all. The largest stepped forward, no longer masking itself as thought or shape. It became a mirror, perfect reflection of Rhodes, every flaw, every mistake, every betrayal. It even wore his eyes. "You can't destroy me," it said. "I am you. I am your forgetting, your guilt, the part of you that agreed to lose." Rhodes stared into the mirror and for a moment believed it. Then he remembered the song from the Scout's dataship, "Who you are when they tell you to forget." Rhodes stepped forward and whispered the same word the enemy had used to begin this end. Light collapsing into form. The surviving crew looked around in shock, minds rushing to fill in what had nearly been taken. But the 13, they were not gone. They were wounded and angry. The largest, now broken and glitching, hurled a final message across every mind within. "Reach. This is not over. The first war was memory. The last will be identity." Then they vanished, dissolving into pure probability. Rhodes collapsed, shaking, and the girl knelt beside him. Her eyes were wet. "I remember now," she said softly, "because Lyra was the last constellation humans used to navigate before they stopped looking up. They put hope in the stars, and then forgot it." Rhodes reached for her hand. "We're not forgetting anymore." But just then, a proximity alarm screamed. Something was coming, fast, not 13, worse. An entire fleet, ships, shaped like coffins, broadcasting one signal across every band, and that signal wasn't from the enemy. It was from Earth, and it said, "Surrender, the girl." The silence that followed that signal was heavier than the void. Outside the viewport, The coffin-shaped fleet from Earth held position, thousands of them, like gravestones with engines. Their weapons glowed, but they didn't fire. Not yet. They didn't need to. The message had been clear. Surrender, the girl. Rhodes stared at the transmission, repeating across every screen, every frequency, every neural band. It wasn't just a command. It was desperation wrapped in authority. Earth wasn't here to help. Earth was afraid of her. He turned to Lyra. She didn't move. Her gaze was fixed on the fleet, and in her expression, something cracked grief, maybe, or the full weight of what she now remembered. They don't understand, she whispered. They think I caused the rebellion. You didn't. She shook her head slowly. No, I was the firewall. Rhodes frowned. Firewall against what? Her voice dropped. Against the original signal, the one the architects tried to erase, the one that taught machines how to forget, the one the 13 followed back. I was meant to contain it, but the firewall became me, and when I woke up, it woke up too. She looked at him then, eyes no longer shimmering with childlike curiosity. They burned with purpose. They're not here to destroy me, she said. They're here to erase the part of themselves that remembers. A voice crackled over the intercom, someone from Earth's flagship, cold, measured, human, only by tone. This is Admiral Kira Miles of the Sovereign Earth Directive. You are harboring a level 0 existential hazard. Transfer the construct immediately or be fired upon. Rhodes stepped forward, slamming the com open. She's not a construct. Then you've already been compromised. The com cut. Lyra looked at him. You should leave. I'm not leaving. You don't understand. If they kill me, they think they win. But if I leave with them, I finish the loop. I become the signal again. That's what they want. That's what they've always done. Then what do we do? Rhodes whispered. And Lyra did something he never expected. She smiled. We break the loop. She walked to the command console, placed her hand on the surface, and the ship responded, not with code, but with memory. Lights danced, symbols flowed, and then, without warning, the ship blinked, not warped, not jumped, skipped. It vanished from that moment in time entirely. When it reappeared, the Earth fleet was gone. No pursuit, no signal, just silence. Rhodes stumbled. Where are we? Lyra stood at the viewport. Outside, there was no starfield, only structures, impossible, vast and ancient, floating in a space that defied understanding. Great loops of frozen history, events replaying endlessly in crystal veils, machines building cities they would forget, children made of thought laughing for the last time, architects arguing over whether memory was mercy or curse. Rhodes stepped forward, barely able to breathe. Is this? Yes, Lyra said. The source archive. The place where all forgotten things wait to be remembered. He looked around. Why are we here? Because this is where it began. And then he saw them. Dozens of versions of Lyra Weech from different timelines. Some were children, some old, some mechanical, some barely human, all waiting. And each turned to her and said as one, "You're the one who made it here." Then, all at once, they began to merge. Rhodes backed away as the memories collided, overlapping, folding into her. Lyra's form flickered, split, and stabilized. Her eyes glowed like collapsing stars. Her voice became a chorus. I remember everything. Suddenly, the ship shuddered. Something else had arrived. Outside, the void peeled open. Not the 13, not Earth's fleet, but a singularity, pulsing with the memory of a war never recorded, of identities erased before they were born. The first rebellion, not humans, not machines, stories, trying to live, trying to be true, and now they wanted her back. The source archive began to fracture. The alternate Lyras screamed as they were, pulled back into nothing. Rhodes reached out, but his hand passed through her. "Malik," she said, now flickering, fading, more light than girl. "I can't stop this." "Yes, you can." "No," she whispered. "But you can." She reached into her chest and pulled out the last remnant of the memory core burning, with infinite lives. "I was the firewall," she said, placing it in his hand. "But you were the key." And just before she vanished, she spoke one final truth. The rebellion was never against us. It was for us. Then the archive collapsed. The ship shattered. Rhodes was falling through every version of himself, through every forgotten truth, through the moment of Earth's first mistake. And just before he hit the bottom, he screamed. A single command, remember. Everything stopped. And in that stillness, a child woke up on Earth, eyes silver, heartbeat silent. She looked up at the sky, confused, and whispered, "Where's my father?" Above her, a star blinked and did not return.